In our continuing examination of Peter van Inwagen's metaphysics from his book titled Metaphysics, we're looking at the topic of externalism. And the idea is, in contrast to that, is idealism. So this is part one, where we're going to explore the ideas, especially of Berkeley, contrasting them with the common Western metaphysic. And externalism is a thesis of the common Western metaphysic. It claims that there are non-mental objects. So this is the way we normally think about things. These are objects that exist independently of our minds, such as birds or baskets or berries. So these are things that we presume exist, whether or not we're thinking of them or perceiving them. Externalism, though, has been challenged by George Berkeley and other idealists following Berkeley, of course. And so we want to look at, in this video, the ideas of idealism, the rejection of externalism, the motivation for doing that, and be really clear about the thesis before we go on to part two, where we look at van Inwagen's criticism of the view. So there are a few things in this world that are a sure thing. So some people might say death and taxes, of course, but we're talking about things even more broadly than that when we're doing metaphysics. So, for example, mental contents are things that are more sure than other things. So the experience of being in pain. If you're in pain, you know you're in pain. If somebody says, no, you're not in pain, you know what you know. You know that you're in pain. You know what you're sensing. Being anxious, you know when you're anxious. When you're thinking about a particular topic, such as maybe prime numbers, you know what you are thinking about. And so the lesson there is that the internal realm, the life of the mind, we might say, is reliably known. One cannot be mistaken about the present surface content of one's own mind. Now, this is important to add those qualifiers that Van Inwagen adds. Present content, so what we're experiencing now is what we're talking about, and the surface content, so we don't have to worry about maybe subconscious things that might be going on in our mind that we're not aware of. So that's what we're talking about, the present surface content of one's mind. We're fully aware of that. These things are reliably known. They're not something that we have to rely on other things in order to understand them. So the modern context, and by modern in philosophy, broadly speaking, we're talking about the era around 1600 to up to 1800 or so. And that would include Descartes. And Descartes' arguments concluded that the realm of the mental, right, what we're thinking and feeling, is more real than what we believe is in the external world. So some mental activities are impossible to doubt. Of course, for Descartes, famously, I think, therefore I am, and I exist is something that's not possible to doubt, even though some contemporary philosophers have criticized that argument of his. For Locke, another modern philosopher, he argued that there are two types of qualities that objects have. There are primary qualities such as shape and size. We could add number and motion to that list. And these do not depend on our mental state. So they are the same. Locke thought they existed in an external world, but they don't depend on us and what's going on in our mind. But there are secondary qualities, says Locke, such as hot or cold or color. And we'll talk about those two in particular, but he would also add the pitches of sounds, odors, flavors. These things are dependent on mental states. So think of flavors here for a moment. Just say eating chocolate and drinking orange juice. When you drink orange juice and then eat chocolate, it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't quite taste the same. Or if you reverse that order, it's still a little odd tasting, or orange juice after brushing your teeth. So flavors kind of change according to what's going on inside us and our mental states of sensations that we've had previously. Berkeley took this another step, and his line, the famous statement of Berkeley, is that to be or to exist is to perceive, that is to be a mind, or be perceived, and that is to be the content of a mind. And Berkeley's question, the kind of challenged Locke's view and other people's view, who the Common Western Metaphysic view that says there are external objects. He says, if there is an external world, how do we know anything about it? So Berkeley's idea is, look, we really only know what's going on in our mind ever. That's all we ever know, right? We can't get out of our mind. That would be crazy, right? To be out of your mind. So Berkeley uses an example of a snowball. So consider a snowball. All that we know of it are ideas about what it's like. Its properties, in other words. We know that it might be hard, round, white, cold. So, but those are all ideas that we experience in our mind. They exist in the mind. So that is a motivation then for Berkeley's view that says that nothing exists outside of one's mind, right? That everything, he's not a solipsist, but outside of a mind, one mind or another, right? So that's one motivation for his view. A second motivation is this idea that properties are mental properties, all of them. So let's think of the property of roundness. So there are visual properties and there are tactile properties, and that shows you. So consider a tennis ball. Think of a tennis ball. When you look at it, you can see that it's round. So that's visual roundness. And that can't exist without a mind, though. If you grab it and feel it, even if your eyes are closed or if you're visually impaired, you can tell that it's round, but that would be tactile roundness. And of course, tactile roundness cannot exist outside of a mind. And all properties end up being like this. So every property is a mental property. So again, to be is to be a perceiver or to be perceived. Now, Berkeley follows Locke historically, and for some reason I have that out of order. Sorry about that. One hand in cold water. Imagine doing this. So Locke has this experiment where he suggests you put one hand in cold water. Let's say it's 35 degrees. Put another hand in very warm water. Let's say 100 degrees. You allow your hands to acclimate to that, leave them in there for a minute or so, and then you take them both out and put them in a bucket of water that's kind of lukewarm, the temperature of the room, say around 70 degrees. Now, the hand that was in the hot water will feel that water as cool. The hand that was in the cold water will feel that water as warm. So Locke argues that sensations of hot and cold are things that are only in our mind. They only exist in our mind. Now, you could do that experiment if you wanted to. You could stop the video and do that experiment. Or we could imagine a different experiment. Now, just to be clear what's going on here, the reasoning, the argument is something like this. If the heat is actually in the water, in that last bucket that we imagine being room temperature, then you would perceive it the same, right? But you don't perceive it in the same. So the heat's not in the water. It's actually just in the mind. Okay, So cover one eye. So if you have good vision in both eyes, this will work. And I apologize for those who are visually impaired. I'll describe what's going on next. So if you cover, let's say, your left eye, and go ahead and do that now. And what I want you to be doing is with your right eye only, be looking at the dot that's on the screen. Now continue to do that. We're going to change the screen to red now. And as you continue to look at that dot, I'm not going to try to memorize, hypnotize you or anything like that. That's not what's going on. This is not an optical illusion. The dot shouldn't be moving around. I just want you to keep focusing on that dot with your right eye. It shouldn't, there's not going to be a jump scare here. So don't worry about anything like that. What we're doing is we're getting your eye acclimated to the color red, kind of like your hand getting acclimated to either the hot water or the cold water. So that's the idea behind this. So we're looking at this red screen with one eye, getting that eye acclimated to it. And now as we switch to this screen, keep your left eye closed, your right eye looking at the screen. Now look at it with your left eye. Again, it's a white screen that we're looking at. Right eye, then left eye. Right eye, then left eye. You should notice a difference in color that you are perceiving, which Locke would argue means that the color is not actually on the screen, it's in your mind. And for those who are visually impaired, what the end result is when you're looking at the white screen is your right eye sees it as somewhat bluish, and your left eye that was colored will see it more as white. And then you can just go back and forth. Is it blue? Is it white? Okay. For Berkeley, his arguments are based then on some of the ideas of Descartes and Locke. So he says that Descartes is correct about the nature of mental states as being the most real. So when we are in pain, when we're thinking about rabbits, when we're wondering if Berkeley, California is named after Berkeley, these are things that are very real to us, and we know them for certain. By the way, Berkeley, California is named after Berkeley, even though it's pronounced differently, just to put you at ease there with the answer to that question. So Locke is on the right track, Berkeley says. Those variance arguments that we just considered with sensations of hot and cold, with visual perceptions of color, show that they are mind dependent. So Locke is on the right track there. There are qualities that are mind dependent. But even what he considered primary qualities, recall shape, size, number, and motion, Berkeley says those qualities are also mind dependent, and you can do the variance argument on those qualities as well. So let's consider shape and size. Berkeley argues that these also depend on our perspective or what's going on in our mind. So you can run the variance argument that we just considered with hot and cold and color, and they also work on primary quality. So consider shape. Imagine you are looking at a coin from the side. It just would be a line like that. Now, if you twist it just slightly, you've got a very thin oval shape. And as you twist it more and more and more and more, it becomes more perfectly round, although that last circle doesn't quite look perfectly round. In any case, the shape depends on your perspective. As you twist the coin from its edge to looking at it straight on, if the shape itself is changing. So it depends on what's going on in our mind. And if the shape depends on what's going on in our mind, then it's not in the coin, it's in the mind. It's not in, I should correct that. It's not in an external world, it's in our mind. And we could do this with size as well. And of course, size here, if you get up, they'll hold the coin, just a couple inches from your eyes or a few inches from your eyes, you can see it, and maybe it'll be around that size. But as you move it further distant away, 8 inches and then a foot and then 2.5 feet or something, right? It gets smaller in your visual field. So size varies according to how we perceive something. And Berkeley says that that means that size is also mind dependent. Those properties are mind dependent. And Berkeley says that Occam's razor, right, favors idealism, right? We want the simplest explanation. We shouldn't propose entities beyond what is necessary. And so he says we shouldn't assume there's something in the external world when it's something that we perceive with our mind. And so that's the view. So let's be clear about the overall claims of idealism. So slide 1 here out of a few, so I'm not numbering the claims, I'm just numbering the slide. Common objects are nothing beyond their properties. That's one of the ideas of idealism, right? This is a rejection of the common Western metaphysic. Nothing exists but minds and modifications of minds. That would be perception. Says Berkeley would say it, to be is to perceive or to be perceived. That's all that exists. So there aren't any external objects that are distinct from one's mind, that exist separately from any mind at all. Another claim of idealism is that we can be certain about the surface content of our mind, as we've been discussed before. So you can be very confident about being in pain, or if you're thinking of basketball, you know what you're thinking about, you know what you're experiencing. Okay, second set of claims for idealism. In contrast to material substance, as we would generally think of it, as the common Western metaphysic thinks of these things, material substance is something that's unknowable. We would have to get outside of our mind in order to directly know material objects, but we cannot do that. To think you can do that would be getting out of your mind, which of course would mean you're not being rational. So idealism is actually consistent with the common Western metaphysics, says Berkeley. It's not anti-realism. How do things exist, say, when no one else is around to think about them or to perceive them? And is a challenge here. And Berkeley says it's all very reasonable. And the answer to that question, why, how can things continue to exist if nothing's perceiving them, right? If the tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it really make a sound, right? That question, Berkeley says it wouldn't, except for the fact that God is there to perceive everything. God makes objects real. And in fact, Berkeley considered this an argument for the existence of God. We're not going to push on that line of thought, but that was his resolution to this challenge about things popping into existence or going out of existence according to whether they're perceived or not. God perceives everything, so everything continues in existence. The idealist also says, and Berkeley certainly affirms, that when we are talking about trees or rabbits or buildings or people, they really exist. So there really are such things. They just exist as mental perceptions, right? That's what they are. So if you were to ask the idealist, are trees real? They would say, yes, trees are real. They are perceptions. Okay? All right, a third set of claims from the idealist is that all properties then are sensible properties, that is, things that we perceive. And objects that we talk about, trees or birds or basketballs, are nothing more than collections of properties. And Berkeley again says, what else could they be? You can't have any material substance. Again, that doesn't make any sense. And sensible properties, what are sensible properties? These are things experienced by our senses. In other words, they are the same thing as the sensations that we have. So again, compare visual roundness with tactile roundness. These are perceptions that we have. And so roundness, you can distinguish different kinds of roundness. There's visual roundness and there's tactile roundness. And these are different kinds of things. Okay, so that's what idealism claims, even though it claims to be consistent with the common Western metaphysic. Obviously, there are significant differences with the common Western metaphysic. So we're going to see what those differences are and how Van Inwagen responds to idealism and Berkeley's view in particular in part